I'm rattled. For years, decades even, I've lived under a fragile peace. A peace built on the deliberate and unwavering severance of ties with my parents. Now, that peace is shattered. The serpent, thought dead, has stirred. Let me give you some context. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 43, happily married to the most amazing man, and we have a daughter, Clara, who is the absolute light of my life. We're normal, content, the kind of normal I could only dream of as a kid. The reason I use Vance instead of my birth name is because I legally changed it the moment I turned 18. I was so desperate to put some distance between myself and my birth family. My parents, well, they weren't monsters in the typical sense. They weren't physically abusive, didn't starve me, or anything like that. But they were masters of a more insidious kind of cruelty, emotional neglect and relentless favoritism. They perfected the art of making me feel perpetually inadequate, perpetually less than. From the moment my brother Julian came along, he was the sun, moon, and stars. The golden child. He could do no wrong. Every accomplishment, no matter how small, was met with lavish praise and adoration. Me? I was the shadow, the afterthought. Eleanor! I wasn't dumb, I wasn't lazy, I was just different. Julian excelled in math and science, the subjects my parents deemed worthy of merit. I gravitated toward art and music. While he was winning academic awards, I was painting murals and composing melodies. My creativity was dismissed as a childish hobby, a distraction from what really mattered, business acumen. You see, my parents own Vance Industries, a sprawling logistics and finance empire. Julian was groomed from birth to take the reins. I was expendable, a decorative piece they kept around to show the world they had a daughter. It wasn't just the accolades. It was the subtle, constant chipping away at my self-worth. If Julian scored a 95 on a test, he was a genius. If I scored a 75, I was lazy and not living up to my potential. Their criticism became a relentless internal monologue, a constant reminder of my perceived failures. It was like living in a house with two suns, where one basked in endless light and the other withered in the shadows. I developed a thick skin out of necessity, I guess. You learn to survive, but living under that roof was suffocating. Every minor transgression was magnified, every mistake weaponized. It was a constant, low-grade anxiety. And then there was the body shaming. I was always a bit curvy. In their world, curves were a sign of laziness and moral failing. I was constantly told to lose weight, to be more presentable. It drove me down a dark path, and I developed bulimia. It was a desperate attempt to control something, anything, in a world where I felt utterly powerless. I'd binge, then purge, the shame eating away at me like acid. It was a vicious cycle, a secret I guarded fiercely. Unsurprisingly, my confidence was non-existent. I was terrified of judgment, always seeking validation, and ended up attracting some seriously toxic men. They preyed on my insecurities, reinforcing the narrative that I was somehow unworthy. Then, Liam, he was different. He saw me. He didn't try to mold me into someone I wasn't. He treated me with respect, as an equal. He was patient, kind, and fiercely protective. He also gave me space. He didn't smother me. He understood that I needed to find my own way. He even saved me from a particularly vile classmate who tried to exploit my insecurities. Liam confronted him and ensured he faced consequences. That was the turning point. I realized what a healthy relationship looked like. We got married in 2002 when I was 22. So, for the last 25 years, I've built a life far away from that toxic environment. A life filled with love, laughter, and genuine connection. Liam and I raised Clara to be strong, independent, and fiercely compassionate. We made sure she knew her worth, that her voice mattered. Clara is extraordinary. She inherited my creativity, my stubbornness, my empathy. But she also has Liam's sharp intellect, his quiet strength, and his unwavering moral compass. She is currently dating a wonderful boy, Ben, a year younger than her, and seeing them together is like watching my own love story unfold, but without the baggage. They have a healthy, respectful relationship. They communicate openly and support each other's dreams. It's everything I ever wanted for her. A few days ago, Clara came to me, her brow furrowed with concern. "Mom," she said, "Grandma and Grandpa are trying to contact me." My blood ran cold. I hadn't spoken to them in decades. They didn't even know where I lived. "How?" Clara explained that they had been approaching her after school, showering her with unwanted gifts and saccharine compliments. They had been relentlessly asking about me, prying for my address. Clara, bless her heart, refused to give them any information. She knew what they had done to me, and she was fiercely protective. But she was also starting to feel overwhelmed. She knew that something was up, and she was right. I wanted to shield her, to protect her from the darkness of my past. But I also knew that running wouldn't solve anything. So I decided to take control. I started driving her to and from school, keeping a watchful eye on things. I trusted Clara's instincts. She's sharp and perceptive. I let her handle things for a while, knowing that she could manage. But after a few days, she came to me, her voice tight with frustration. "Mom, I can't do this anymore," she said. "They're getting too persistent. It's time for you to step in," so I agreed. I decided to meet them. On my terms, in a public place where I felt relatively safe. I chose a cafe I hadn't been to in years, a place that held no sentimental value, a neutral ground for a confrontation I knew was coming. As I waited for them, my hands trembled slightly. It had been so long. What would they look like? What would they say? A wave of nausea washed over me, a familiar feeling from my childhood. The fear, the anxiety, the sense of impending doom. It all came flooding back. And then they walked through the door. They looked old. Time, it seemed, had finally caught up with them. The sharp, calculating glint in my father's eyes was now clouded with a hint of desperation. My mother, always impeccably dressed and meticulously groomed, looked worn and weary, the lines around her mouth etched deeper than I remembered. They spotted me and approached, their faces carefully composed in what I assumed was an attempt at warmth. It failed, miserably. "Eleanor," my mother said, her voice strained. "It's been a long time." "Indeed, it has," I replied, my voice cool and detached. "What brings you here?" "To my town?" The small talk that followed was excruciating. Polite inquiries about my health, my job, my life, all delivered with a forced sincerity that felt utterly hollow. It was like watching actors performing a poorly rehearsed script. Finally, my father cleared his throat, his gaze hardening. "We need to talk about Julian." "Ah, Julian. The golden child, the one who could do no wrong. What had he done now?" "What about him?" I asked, my voice betraying nothing. "He's made some mistakes," my father said, his tone clipped. "Serious mistakes," my mother chimed in, her voice laced with bitterness. "He's ruined everything, Eleanor. Everything we've worked for." I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Ruined everything? That sounds dramatic." And then the floodgates opened. They launched into a scathing tirade against my brother, painting a picture of incompetence, recklessness, and betrayal. It turned out that Julian, after years of being molded and manipulated, had finally rebelled. He had married a woman my parents despised, a woman they considered unsuitable because she wasn't wealthy or connected. He wasn't just disobeying them, he was actively undermining their plans. He had cost them a lucrative merger, alienated a major client, and even gone to work for a rival company. They emphasized what a financial loss this was to their company. As they recounted Julian's crimes, I couldn't help but feel a pang of something. Not sympathy, exactly. More like a detached amusement. They had spent his entire life trying to control him, and now their creation had turned against them. It was almost poetic, but what truly disgusted me was the way they spoke about him. It was a complete 180 from the way they used to praise him. He was no longer my extraordinary child. Now he was your good-for-nothing older brother. The hypocrisy was staggering. They had built him up, only to tear him down the moment he dared to deviate from their script. "So," I said, interrupting their diatribe, "why are you telling me all this? What does this have to do with me?" My father leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a desperate intensity. "We need your help, Eleanor," I scoffed. "My help? After all these years? You expect me to help you now?" "We know we haven't always been fair to you," my mother said, her voice softening slightly. "But family is family. And we're in trouble. Fair?" I repeated, my voice laced with sarcasm. "That's an interesting choice of words." They continued to lay it on thick, praising my business acumen, my organizational skills, my hidden potential. It was all so transparent, so manipulative. They were trying to butter me up, to appeal to my vanity. They knew I had started my own successful marketing company. But it was too late. The wounds of the past ran too deep. I had spent years healing, building a life free from their toxic influence. I wasn't about to let them drag me back in. And then they brought Clara into it. "We want to be a part of Clara's life," my mother said, her voice taking on a saccharine sweetness. "We're her grandparents. She deserves to know us." That was it. That was the line. "You have no rights," I said, my voice dangerously low. "You forfeited those rights a long time ago. You will not use my daughter to get to me." They tried to guilt-trip me, claiming I was being a cruel and vindictive daughter, that I was depriving Clara of her heritage. They even accused me of brainwashing her against them. "I have told Clara the truth," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I have told her about your unique parenting style. I have told her about the favoritism, the criticism, the constant pressure to conform. I have told her everything she needs to know to protect herself." They tried to argue, to plead, to manipulate. But I was done. I had heard enough. "If you ever," I said, rising to my feet, "approach my daughter again, I will sue you. I will make sure you never see her, or me, again. Do you understand?" They stared at me, their faces contorted with anger and resentment. "You'll regret this, Eleanor," my father hissed. "You'll regret turning your back on your family." "I regret nothing," I said, my voice cold and unwavering. "I have a real family now. A family built on love, respect, and mutual support. And you are not a part of it." I turned and walked away, leaving them sitting there, defeated and seething. As I stepped out into the sunlight, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. I had stood up to them, defended my daughter, and reaffirmed my boundaries. But I knew this wasn't over. They wouldn't give up that easily. The serpent had been awakened, and it was hungry. The next few days were filled with a tense unease. I kept expecting my parents to show up at my house, at Clara's school, or even at my office. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, jumpy and on edge. Liam, ever the rock, tried to reassure me. He reminded me that I had done the right thing, that I had set clear boundaries, and that we would protect Clara no matter what. He even suggested installing a security system and getting a restraining order, but I hesitated. I didn't want to overreact, to create unnecessary drama. I confided in some close friends about what had happened, and they were horrified. They couldn't believe my parents would try to manipulate me after all these years. They offered their support and encouragement, reminding me of how far I had come and how strong I had become. Clara, sensing my anxiety, tried to lighten the mood. She made jokes about her grandparents being evil villains and assured me that she could handle anything they threw at her. But I could see the worry in her eyes. She was trying to be brave, but she was also scared. One evening, as I was putting Clara to bed, she asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. Mom, she said, her voice small, do you think they'll ever change? I didn't know how to answer. Part of me wanted to say no, that people like my parents never truly change. But another part of me, a small, fragile part, still held onto a sliver of hope. I don't know, sweetheart, I said, stroking her hair. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that we protect ourselves. We don't let their negativity affect us. We focus on the good things in our lives, on the love and happiness we share. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. She had inherited my empathy, my desire to see the best in people. It was a beautiful quality, but it also made her vulnerable. The next day, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. Hello? I said cautiously. Eleanor? A voice said on the other end. It was my brother, Julian. I hadn't spoken to Julian in years, not since I left home. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies either. He had always been somewhat aloof, caught between his loyalty to our parents and his own desire for independence. Julian? I said, surprised. What do you want? I heard what happened, he said, his voice strained. About Mom and Dad contacting you. And? I said, my tone guarded. I just wanted to apologize, he said, for everything, for the way they treated you, for the way I didn't stand up for you. I was taken aback. This was not the Julian I remembered. It's okay, I said, my voice softening slightly. It was a long time ago. No, it's not okay, he said. They were wrong, and I let them get away with it. I was too afraid to speak up, but I'm not afraid anymore. He went on to tell me about his own struggles with our parents, about their relentless control and manipulation. He confirmed everything I had suspected, about how they had groomed him to be their puppet, their extension. They're desperate, Eleanor, he said. They're losing everything, and they're trying to use you to get it back. I know, I said. I'm not going to let them. Good, he said, because they'll stop at nothing. They're capable of anything. He then offered me some advice based on his own experience dealing with our parents. He warned me about their tactics, their manipulation, their willingness to exploit any weakness. You need to protect Clara, he said. She's their only leverage now. They'll try to get to you through her. I know, I said. I'm doing everything I can. Consider getting a restraining order, he said. It might seem extreme, but it's the only way to keep them away. I hesitated. I don't know, just think about it, he said. For Clara's sake. We talked for a while longer, catching up on each other's lives. It was strange, talking to Julian after all these years. It was like we were finally seeing each other for the first time, without the baggage of our childhood. As we hung up, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Maybe we could finally break free from the cycle of toxicity that had plagued our family for so long. But I also felt a growing sense of unease. Julian's warning about our parents' desperation echoed in my mind. They would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. And Clara was their target. I had to protect her, no matter what. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Liam was asleep beside me, his breathing deep and steady. I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to take action. I reached for my phone and started searching for a lawyer. It was time to get a restraining order. It was time to protect my family. It was time to fight back. The process of obtaining a restraining order was arduous and emotionally draining. I had to recount the details of my abusive childhood, relive the trauma, and expose my deepest vulnerabilities to a complete stranger. It was humiliating and exhausting, but I knew it was necessary. My lawyer, a sharp and compassionate woman named Miss Davies, was incredibly supportive. She listened patiently, offered sound advice, and assured me that she would do everything in her power to protect me and my family. In the meantime, my parents continued their relentless pursuit of Clara. They started showing up at her school events, sending her unsolicited gifts, and even trying to contact her through social media. Clara, bless her heart, handled it all with remarkable poise and maturity. She politely declined their gifts, ignored their social media requests, and refused to engage in conversation with them. She even started documenting their interactions, taking photos and videos as evidence. One day, she came home with a particularly amusing story. My parents had attempted to corner her after school, showering her with compliments and invitations to lunch. Clara, in her typically sarcastic manner, had responded with a series of increasingly absurd questions, effectively annoying them into retreating. "They were not happy, Mom," she said, giggling. "Grandma called me a spoiled brat." It was hilarious. Liam and I couldn't help but laugh. Clara's quick wit and unwavering defiance were a source of constant pride and amusement. But beneath the laughter, there was a lingering sense of unease. I knew my parents wouldn't give up easily. They were too stubborn, too entitled, too convinced of their own righteousness. They would continue to push, to probe, to find any weakness in our defenses. The restraining order was finally granted 2 weeks later. It was a huge relief. A sense of security, however fragile, settled over our family. I felt like I could finally breathe again. But I knew this was just the beginning. My parents wouldn't simply accept the restraining order and disappear. They would retaliate. They would try to find a way to circumvent the law, to undermine my authority, to get what they wanted. I had to be prepared. I had to be vigilant. I had to protect my family at all costs. A few days later, I received a package in the mail. It was addressed to Clara. I hesitated before opening it, a sense of foreboding washing over me. Inside, I found a beautifully wrapped box. I carefully unwrapped it, my hands trembling slightly. Inside the box was a porcelain doll, dressed in a delicate lace gown. It was exquisite and eerily familiar. Then it hit me. It was the same doll I had owned as a child. The doll my mother had cherished, the doll I had accidentally broken when I was 8 years old, the doll she had never forgiven me for breaking. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't just a gift, it was a message, a reminder of my past, of my failures, of my worthlessness. It was a calculated act of cruelty, designed to trigger my deepest insecurities. I wanted to destroy the doll, to smash it into a million pieces. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything. It would only give my parents the satisfaction of knowing they had gotten to me. Instead, I carefully rewrapped the doll and placed it in a box. I then drove to my parents' lawyer's office and handed it over, along with a letter outlining their violation of the restraining order. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. I had shown them that I wouldn't be intimidated, that I wouldn't be manipulated, that I wouldn't back down. But I knew this was far from over. The war had just begun, and I had a feeling it was going to get a lot uglier before it was over. The lawyer's warning lingered in the air like a toxic fume. The knowledge that my parents were actively defying the restraining order was infuriating, but it also fueled my resolve. I wouldn't let them win. "Miss!" Davies immediately filed a motion to hold my parents in contempt of court. This time, they couldn't worm their way out of it with empty apologies and crocodile tears. The judge, clearly unimpressed with their antics, imposed a hefty fine and warned them that any further violations would result in jail time. It seemed to have worked, for a while at least. The unwanted gifts stopped, the social media solicitations ceased, and the sightings at Clara's school became a thing of the past. A fragile peace settled over our lives once again. During this time, I decided to reach out to Julian. We had several long conversations, filled with raw honesty and shared pain. It was as if the years of silence had stripped away the layers of pretense, leaving us both exposed and vulnerable. Julian revealed that his wife, Olivia, had been instrumental in helping him break free from our parents' control. She had encouraged him to seek therapy, to confront his demons, and to define his own path. "She saved me, Eleanor," he confessed. "I don't know where I'd be without her." I was genuinely happy for him. It was comforting to know that he had found someone who loved and supported him unconditionally. Julian also offered to testify on my behalf if things escalated with our parents. He was willing to share his own experiences with their manipulative behavior to corroborate my claims of abuse and neglect. His offer was incredibly generous, and I was deeply touched. It felt like we were finally becoming a family, in the truest sense of the word. But my parents, it turned out, had one last card to play. A desperate, underhanded maneuver designed to inflict maximum damage. One afternoon, I received a call from Clara's school. The principal informed me that my parents had contacted the school administration, claiming that I was an unfit mother and that Clara was in danger. They had requested a meeting with the principal to discuss their concerns and to potentially seek custody of Clara. I was stunned. This was beyond anything I could have imagined. They were willing to tear my family apart, to destroy my life, just to get what they wanted. I immediately contacted Miss Davies, who was equally appalled. She assured me that she would handle the situation and that my parents' claims were baseless. "They're grasping at straws, Eleanor," she said. "They have no legal grounds to seek custody of Clara. But we need to be proactive. We need to show the court that you are a loving and capable mother." I spent the next few days gathering evidence of my parenting abilities. I collected photos of Clara and me, letters of recommendation from teachers and friends, and records of Clara's academic achievements. I also prepared a statement, detailing the abuse I had suffered at the hands of my parents and explaining why I had chosen to cut them out of my life. It was a painful process, but it was necessary to protect my daughter. The meeting with the school principal was tense and uncomfortable. My parents presented their case, painting a picture of me as an unstable and neglectful mother. They accused me of alienating Clara from her grandparents, of poisoning her mind against them. I listened calmly, refusing to be drawn into their emotional theatrics. When they were finished, I presented my own evidence, refuting their claims point by point. The principal, a fair and reasonable woman, listened attentively to both sides. After careful consideration, she ruled in my favor. She dismissed my parents' concerns and affirmed my role as Clara's primary caregiver. It was a resounding victory, but it was also a wake-up call. I realized that my parents would never stop, that they would continue to attack me and my family until they were completely defeated. I knew I had to take drastic action. I had to cut them off completely, to sever all ties, to protect Clara from their poisonous influence once and for all. I decided to file a lawsuit against my parents, seeking damages for the emotional distress and psychological harm they had inflicted upon me throughout my life. It was a risky move, but I felt like I had no other choice. The lawsuit was a long and arduous process. My parents fought back fiercely, denying all wrongdoing and attempting to discredit my claims. But I refused to back down. I was determined to hold them accountable for their actions, to expose their lies, and to finally put an end to their reign of terror. The trial was a grueling ordeal. I had to relive my childhood trauma, to testify about the abuse I had endured, to face my parents in court and accuse them of their crimes. It was emotionally exhausting, but it was also incredibly empowering. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control. I was speaking my truth, standing up for myself, and fighting for my daughter's future. In the end, the jury ruled in my favor. They found my parents guilty of emotional abuse and awarded me a substantial sum in damages. It wasn't about the money. It was about justice. It was about sending a message that abuse is never okay, that parents are responsible for their children's well-being, and that victims have the right to seek redress. My parents were devastated. Their reputation was ruined, their finances were depleted, and their relationship with Julian was shattered beyond repair. They had lost everything. I felt a pang of something, not sympathy, exactly. More like a detached sense of closure. They had finally paid the price for their actions, and I was finally free. The aftermath of the trial was surreal. The media frenzy was intense. but I refused to give interviews or to capitalize on my newfound notoriety. I simply wanted to move on with my life, to focus on my family, and to leave the past behind. My relationship with Julian deepened. We spoke regularly, supporting each other through the emotional fallout of the trial. He and Olivia were planning to start a family, and he vowed to never repeat the mistakes our parents had made. He was determined to create a loving and nurturing environment for his children, free from the toxicity of our upbringing. Clara, meanwhile, continued to thrive. She excelled in school, pursued her artistic passions, and maintained a healthy and loving relationship with Ben. She was a confident, compassionate, and independent young woman, and I couldn't have been prouder. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, Clara turned to me and said, "Mom, thank you." "For what, sweetheart?" I asked. "For protecting me," she said. "For fighting for me. For showing me what it means to be strong." I smiled, tears welling up in my eyes. "You didn't need me to be strong, Clara," I said. "You were always strong. I just helped you find your voice." She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it tightly. "I love you, Mom," she said. "I love you too, Clara," I replied. More than words can say. As I looked at my daughter, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, I knew that I had finally broken the cycle of abuse. I had created a better life for myself and for my family. I had given Clara the love and support I had never received, and she had blossomed into an extraordinary human being. My parents' actions had left a lasting scar on my soul, but they had also made me stronger, more resilient, and more determined to protect those I loved. I would never forget the pain of my past, but I refused to let it define me. I would continue to heal, to grow, and to create a future filled with love, laughter, and happiness. And I would always be grateful for the love of my husband, the strength of my daughter, and the support of my friends and family. They were the ones who had helped me survive, who had given me hope, and who had shown me that even in the darkest of times, there is always light to be found. As for my parents, I don't know what the future holds for them. I can only hope that they will find a way to heal, to learn from their mistakes, and to make amends for the harm they have caused. But I also know that I can't fix them. I can't change the past. I can only control my own actions and protect my own family. And that is what I intend to do.